The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I leave my entire estate, including the family home at 842 Maple Street and all financial assets, to my son, Ryan Michael Thompson. Patricia Martinez, our family lawyer for over 20 years, cleared her throat and looked directly at me across her modest office. "Jessica, I'm sorry, but your father has left you nothing. Nothing. After 29 years of being Daddy's little girl, after holding his hand through Mom's cancer battle, after spending every weekend for the past 2 years helping him with groceries and doctor appointments while my brother Ryan was too busy building his real estate empire. Nothing." Ryan shifted in his chair beside me, and I caught the flash of something in his eyes that wasn't surprise. It was satisfaction. Pure, cold satisfaction. But what Patricia said next changed everything. However, there's something else we need to discuss. Something your father would have wanted you to know. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder. "I've been documenting conversations about this will for the past 6 months. Your father asked me to, actually. He was concerned about outside influences on his decision-making. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Thompson, though everyone in Millbrook, Ohio calls me Miss Jess. I teach 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary, the same school I attended as a child, in the same small town where 4 generations of Thompsons have lived and died. Until last Tuesday, I thought I understood my place in the world. I was the daughter who stayed close to home, who chose caring for others over chasing money, who held our family together after Mom passed 5 years ago. I never imagined that choice would cost me everything." The morning of Dad's will reading started like any other October day in our small town. The maple trees along Riverside Avenue had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and I'd walked the 3 blocks from my apartment to Patricia's office above Millbrook Pharmacy, the same route I'd taken countless times as a child when Mom would bring me along for family legal matters. Patricia Martinez had handled everything for our family since before I was born. Mom and Dad's wills, the incorporation papers for Thompson Construction, even my parents' house purchase back in 1987. Her office hadn't changed much in all those years. The same oak desk that had belonged to her mentor, the same family photos scattered across the bookshelf, the same warm smile that had comforted me through some of life's hardest moments. When Mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, Patricia had helped Dad navigate the insurance paperwork. When the construction business needed restructuring during the 2008 recession, she'd guided them through it. She wasn't just our lawyer, she was family. That's why the formal tone in her voice that morning felt so wrong. Ryan arrived exactly at 10, 15 minutes after our scheduled appointment time. Punctuality had never been his strong suit, especially when it came to family obligations. He swept into the small office like he owned it, his expensive suit a sharp contrast to my simple black dress and cardigan. At 32, my older brother had inherited Dad's broad shoulders and commanding presence, but where Dad had used his authority to build up others, Ryan wielded his like a weapon. "Sorry I'm late," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "Had to take a call from the Columbus office. Big development deal closing next week." He kissed my cheek in a gesture that looked brotherly to anyone watching, but I felt the coldness in it. We'd been distant since Dad's funeral 3 weeks earlier, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly when our relationship had started deteriorating. Maybe it was when he'd married Amanda 6 years ago, and she'd made it clear that family gatherings were an inconvenience to their social calendar. Maybe it was when he'd pressured Dad to sell Thompson Construction instead of keeping it in the family. Or maybe it was something deeper, something that had been building for years. "Patricia, good to see you," Ryan said, settling into the chair beside mine with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "I know this is just a formality, But Amanda's got the kids at soccer practice, so if we could move things along. Patricia nodded, but something flickered in her eyes. In all the years I'd known her, I'd never seen her look uncomfortable during a family meeting. She opened the manila folder on her desk with hands that seemed less steady than usual. "Before we begin," she said carefully, "I want you both to know that your father came to see me several times over the past 6 months. He was concerned about making the right decisions regarding his estate." Ryan leaned forward slightly. Dad was getting confused toward the end. We all know that. The medications, the pain. It's understandable he might have had some doubts about things. I frowned. Dad wasn't confused, Ryan. He was sick, but his mind was sharp right up until the end. Jess, come on. You saw how he was mixing up names, forgetting conversations. Dr. Peterson even mentioned the possibility of early cognitive decline. That was news to me. When did Dr. Peterson say that? At one of the appointments you missed. Look, I'm not trying to be harsh, but you weren't there for all of it. Amanda and I were handling most of Dad's care those last few months. The casual dismissal stung because there was enough truth in it to hurt. I had missed some appointments. When my third graders had their Christmas pageant, when parent-teacher conferences ran late, when the school board meeting about budget cuts went past 9 p.m. But I'd been there for the important things. The surgery consultations, the worst nights when he couldn't sleep, the morning he'd asked me to braid Mom's hair one more time, even though she'd been gone for 5 years. Patricia cleared her throat. Let's proceed with the reading. Her voice carried an authority that silenced us both. The last will and testament of Robert James Thompson, dated September 15th of this year. September 15th, 6 weeks before Dad died. 6 weeks after his last really bad spell when he'd been hospitalized for pneumonia complications. I, Robert James Thompson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils. Patricia's voice was steady, professional, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. To my daughter, Jessica Marie Thompson, I leave my love and my hopes that she will understand the decisions I've had to make. My stomach clenched. Love and hopes. Not the house I'd grown up in. Not the savings account he'd always said was for. Both of us kids, not even Mom's jewelry that he'd promised would be mine someday. To my son, Ryan Michael Thompson, I leave my entire estate, including but not limited to the family residence at 842 Maple Street, all bank accounts, investment portfolios, and personal property, with the understanding that he will use these resources wisely and remember the values his mother and I tried to instill. The words seemed to echo in the small office. Entire estate. Everything. The house where I'd learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where Mom had taught me to bake. Chocolate chip cookies, where Dad and I had spent countless evenings working on jigsaw puzzles after Mom got too sick to join us. The savings account that was supposed to help me finally buy a house of my own instead of renting that tiny apartment above the Johnson family's garage. Ryan reached over and squeezed my hand, but it felt more like a claim of ownership than comfort. Jess, I'm sure we can work something out. Maybe you can stay in the house for a while until you figure out your next steps. Stay in my childhood home as a guest. In the house where I'd cared for Dad during his final months, where I'd held his hand as he talked about Mom, where he'd told me just 2 months ago that I was the daughter who'd always been there when it mattered. There's more, Patricia said quietly. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind court reporters used for depositions. Your father asked me to document our conversations about his will. He was concerned about outside influences affecting his judgment. Ryan's hand tightened on mine. What kind of influences? Patricia pressed play, and Dad's voice filled the room. Weak from illness, but unmistakably clear. Unmistakably him. Pat, I need you to keep track of what people are saying to me about the will. Especially family. I'm getting pressure, and I want to make sure I'm making decisions for the right reasons. Not because I'm being pushed around. My heart stopped. Dad's voice continued from the recording, dated 3 months earlier. Ryan came by again today. He's got strong opinions about what I should do with the house. Says Jessica can't handle the responsibility. Says she's not practical like he is. That she'd just let the place fall apart. I stared at Ryan, whose face had gone pale beneath his expensive tan. The recording continued. I told him I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet, but he keeps bringing up how much money it costs to maintain the property, how I should think about what's best for everyone. He says Jessica's got her teaching job. She doesn't need the house like his family does. Patricia stopped the recording. There are 6 hours of conversations like this, Jessica. Your father was documenting pressure from family members trying to influence his estate planning. This is ridiculous, Ryan said, standing up abruptly. Dad asked for my advice. I was trying to help him think through the practical implications. Jess lives in a 1-bedroom apartment and makes $35,000 a year. How is she supposed to maintain a house that needs a new roof and foundation work? How do you know what I make? I asked, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Ryan paused, caught. Dad mentioned it. He was worried about your finances. But Dad had never known my exact salary. I'd never told him, because I didn't want him to worry about me or feel obligated to help. The only way Ryan could know that number was if he'd been digging into my personal information. Patricia pressed play again. This time it was Ryan's voice, clearly recorded through. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dad's phone during what must have been a visit to the house. Dad, you have to be realistic. Jessica's a sweet girl, but she's not prepared for this kind of responsibility. The house alone is worth $300,000, and she doesn't have the first clue about property management. She'd probably end up losing it to foreclosure within 2 years. She's been taking care of me and the house just fine, Dad's voice replied, stronger than in the previous recording. Because you're there to guide her, but once you're gone... Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, but she's never shown any real ambition. She's 30 years old and still renting that tiny apartment, still teaching elementary school like she's fresh out of college. Mom always worried she'd never really grow up. The lie hit me like a physical blow. Mom had been proud of my teaching career, had bragged to her friends about how I'd chosen to serve my community instead of chasing money. She'd never expressed any concern about my ambition or my choices. That's not what Carol thought, Dad said on the recording, his voice firm despite its weakness. Dad, I know this is hard to hear, but someone has to say it. Jessica needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. Inheriting everything would just enable her to keep avoiding real responsibility. Patricia stopped the recording again. This conversation took place 6 weeks before your father's death, Jessica. 3 days later, he came to my office and asked me to start documenting all family discussions about his will. I looked at Ryan, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The brother who'd taught me to drive, who'd walked me down the aisle at my college graduation when Dad was stuck at a job site, who'd held me while I cried at Mom's funeral. That person was gone. In his place sat someone who'd systematically undermined me to our dying father. You told him I was irresponsible, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I told him the truth. Jess, you're living in a fantasy world if you think you could handle Dad's estate. The house needs major work. The investments require active management, and you've never dealt with anything more complicated than a teacher's retirement fund. So you decided for me. You decided I wasn't capable, and you convinced Dad I wasn't worth investing in. I convinced him to be practical. Someone had to. Patricia pulled out another folder. There's something else, Jessica. After your father updated his will to leave everything to Ryan, he came back to see me one more time. He seemed troubled by his decision. She opened the folder and pulled out a handwritten letter in Dad's distinctive scrawl. He asked me to give this to you after the will reading, regardless of what the will said. My hands shook as I took the letter. The envelope was addressed simply to my Jessica in Dad's careful printing. Inside, his handwriting was weaker than usual, but still legible. Sweetheart, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've heard my will. I need you to know that every decision I made was because I love you, even if it doesn't feel that way. Right now, Ryan has been very concerned about your ability to handle the responsibilities that come with the house and the money. He's made some strong arguments about what would be best for everyone. My throat tightened as I continued reading. But I want you to know that I've never doubted your strength or your character. You're the daughter who stayed close, who cared. For your mother and me when we needed it most, who chose to build up children instead of tear down competitors. You're more like your mother than Ryan will ever understand. The letter went on for 2 more pages, describing his pride in my choices, his gratitude for my care during his illness, and his regret about the pressure he'd felt to make what Ryan called the practical decision. I've asked Patricia to record my conversations about the will because I want there to be a record of what influenced my thinking. I hope someday you'll understand that even when I couldn't be strong enough to resist the pressure, I never stopped believing in you. At the bottom, he'd written, P.S. Check the safety deposit box at First National. Box 247. Patricia has the key. I looked up at Patricia through tears I didn't remember starting to shed. There's a safety deposit box? She nodded and handed me a small brass key. Your father opened it 2 weeks before he died. He said it was for you, regardless of what the will stated. Ryan had gone completely silent, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. Finally, he stood up again. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the legal reality. Dad's will is clear and properly executed. Whatever emotional manipulation he's trying to pull from beyond the grave doesn't override his final legal decisions. Manipulation? The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Dad documenting your pressure campaign is manipulation? Dad was sick and confused, and you're taking advantage of that confusion to contest a legitimate will. Patricia cleared her throat. Actually, Ryan, there's one more thing. She pulled out yet another document. Your father came to see me the day before he died. He wanted to add a codicil to his will. A codicil, a legal addition or modification to an existing will. He was too weak to complete the process, Patricia continued. But he made his intentions very clear. He wanted to ensure that Jessica received at least half of the estate, regardless of any previous provisions. Ryan's composure finally cracked. That's impossible. Dad could barely speak that last day. He was on heavy pain medication. He was lucid when he came to my office, Ryan. Weak, but lucid. And very specific about his regrets regarding the original will. Patricia handed me the partially completed codicil, signed by Dad but missing the required witness signatures due to his death the following day. While this document isn't legally binding due to the incomplete execution, she said carefully, it does demonstrate your father's final intentions, combined with the recorded conversations showing the pressure that influenced his original decision. She let the implication hang in the air. Ryan sat back down heavily. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that your father's estate plan may not reflect his true wishes, and that there may be grounds for Jessica to contest the will based on undue influence. For the first time since entering Patricia's office, I felt something other than shock and grief. I felt anger, pure, righteous anger at my brother who'd manipulated our dying father, who'd systematically destroyed Dad's confidence in me, who'd stolen not just my inheritance but my father's trust in his own judgment. The safety deposit box, I said, standing up and pocketing the key. I want to see what's in the safety deposit box. Ryan reached for my arm. Jess, let's talk about this rationally. We're family. We can work something out without involving lawyers and courts and making this whole thing public. I pulled away from his touch. We were family, Ryan. But family doesn't lie to dying parents. Family doesn't manipulate grief-stricken old men into doubting their children. I was protecting Dad's interests and yours. You'll understand when you're thinking more clearly. The condescension in his voice was the final straw. I understand perfectly. I understand that while I was holding Dad's hand during chemo, you were whispering poison in his ear about my capabilities. I understand that while I was helping him with his medications and his physical therapy, you were convincing him I was too immature to handle responsibility. I turned to Patricia. What do I need to do to contest this will? She looked between Ryan and me, sadness evident in her expression. 20 years of handling our family's legal matters, and it had come to this. First, we go to the bank and see what your father left in that safety deposit box. Then we review all the recorded conversations and documentation. If there's sufficient evidence of undue influence, we can file a petition with the probate court. Ryan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the worn carpet. This is insane. You're going to tear our family apart over money? Our family was already torn apart, Ryan. I'm just the last one to realize it. As I walked toward Patricia's door, clutching Dad's letter and the safety deposit box key, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Mom's death, for the first time since Dad's diagnosis, for the first time since I'd accepted that being the good daughter meant being the one who sacrificed for everyone else's benefit, I felt powerful. I had no idea what was in that safety deposit box, or whether the recordings would be enough to overturn Ryan's inheritance, or how I was going to afford a legal battle against my brother's real estate fortune. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Dad had tried to leave me a message, tried to document the truth about what had influenced his final decisions. And I was going to honor that effort, no matter what it cost me. The little girl who'd always tried to keep the peace, who'd always put everyone else's needs first, who'd always assumed that being good and kind and selfless would be enough. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd finally learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones you need to fight the hardest. The brass key felt cold against my palm as I walked the 4 blocks from Patricia's office to First National Bank. October wind whipped through the maple, trees lining Main Street, sending leaves swirling around my feet like tiny tornadoes. I'd walked this same route hundreds of times throughout my life, but today everything looked different. The familiar storefronts, the neighbors waving from their porches, even the old courthouse clock tower. All of it felt like scenery from someone else's life. First National had been Dad's bank since 1979, back when he'd first started Thompson Construction with a borrowed pickup truck and more determination than sense. The same tellers who'd processed his business deposits for decades greeted me with the careful sympathy reserved for the recently bereaved. They knew about Dad's passing, of course. In a town of 15,000, death announcements traveled faster than gossip. "I'm so sorry for your loss, honey," said Mrs. Patterson, the head teller who'd known me since I was old enough to peer over the counter. "Your daddy was a good man." I managed a tight smile and explained why I was there. The safety deposit box access required paperwork, verification, and a trip to the basement vault that felt like descending into a tomb. The bank manager, Tom Hendricks, personally escorted me down the narrow stairs, his dress shoes echoing against the concrete. Box 247 was opened recently, he mentioned as we walked through the sterile hallway lined with metal doors. Your father came in just 2 weeks before he passed. Seemed very specific about what he wanted to store. 2 weeks before Dad died. That would have been right after Ryan's last big push to finalize the will, right after Dad had started asking Patricia to record their conversations. The safety deposit box was larger than I'd expected, big enough to hold documents and personal items. Tom unlocked it with his master key, then handed me the privacy I needed to examine the contents alone. I lifted the metal box from its slot and carried it to the small viewing room. my hands trembling with anticipation and dread. Inside, I found 3 items that made my breath catch in my throat. The first was a manila envelope labeled, "For Jessica, the truth about your brother," in Dad's careful handwriting. Inside were bank statements spanning the past 2 years, showing regular transfers from Dad's checking account to an account I didn't recognize. $5,000 here, $3,000 there, always with memo lines like, "Ryan, house repairs," or "Ryan, emergency expenses." The amounts totaled nearly $40,000 over 24 months. But here's what made my stomach clench. I'd been at the house every weekend for the past 2 years. There had been no major repairs, no emergencies that would require Dad to bail Ryan out with thousands of dollars. The roof still leaked in the back bedroom. The front porch steps still creaked ominously. The furnace that Dad had been saying needed replacement was still limping along with annual Band-Aid fixes. The second item was a small digital camera, the kind Dad had learned to use when he'd gotten interested in photographing his garden. Attached to it was a note. Pictures from Ryan's visits. Notice the dates. I turned on the camera and scrolled through dozens of photos. They showed Ryan at the house, but not the casual family visits I'd imagined. These were clearly staged. Moments. Ryan sitting at Dad's kitchen table with papers spread out, pointing at documents, gesturing emphatically. The timestamps showed visits I hadn't known about, meetings that had happened when I was at work, sessions that looked more like business negotiations than son checking on father. In one particularly damning photo, Ryan was leaning over Dad's shoulder while Dad held a pen over what looked like bank paperwork. Dad's expression was confused, almost pained, while Ryan's face showed the intense focus of someone closing a deal. The third item made me sink into the small metal chair. It was a letter from Dr. Peterson, Dad's primary care physician, dated 3 months before Dad's death. The letter was a response to questions Dad had apparently asked about his mental capacity and decision-making abilities. "Mr. Thompson," the letter read, "as we discussed in your appointment, there is no evidence of cognitive decline or impaired judgment. Your recent blood work shows that your medications are well balanced and should not be affecting your mental clarity. The confusion and memory issues you've been experiencing are likely related to stress and grief rather than any neurological condition. You are absolutely competent to make financial and legal decisions." Ryan had lied. When he'd told me Dr. Peterson was concerned about Dad's mental state, when he'd suggested Dad was too confused to make rational decisions about his estate, when he'd used Dad's supposed cognitive decline to justify his influence over the will, all lies. I sat in that sterile bank room staring at evidence of my brother's systematic manipulation of our dying father, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. This wasn't just about inheritance money. This wasn't even just about the house or the family legacy. This was about Ryan deliberately destroying Dad's confidence in his own mind, making an already frightened old man doubt his ability to think clearly during the most vulnerable period of his life. The walk back to my apartment felt like moving through water. Everything around me seemed muted, distant, unreal. I climbed the narrow stairs to my second-floor unit and spread Dad's evidence across my small dining table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that revealed an image I wished I'd never seen. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "We need to talk. Come to the house tonight. Amanda's making dinner." The house. He was already calling it the house instead of Dad's house, or the family home. Less than 4 hours after the will reading, and he'd mentally moved in. I typed back, "Busy tonight. Maybe this weekend." His response came immediately. "Jess, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're family. We can work through this." Family. The word had lost all meaning in the space of one afternoon. Instead of responding, I called Maria Santos, my closest friend since college, and the only person in Millbrook who would understand the full scope of what I was facing. Maria taught 4th grade at the same elementary school where I worked, and she'd been the one to hold me. Together during Mom's illness and death. "I'm coming over," I said when she answered. "And I'm bringing wine. A lot of wine." Maria's apartment was in the same complex as mine, just 2 buildings over. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside without questions. We'd been friends, long enough that words weren't always necessary. "What happened at the lawyer's office?" she asked, settling onto her couch with the bottle of Merlot I'd grabbed from my kitchen. I told her everything. The will, the recordings, the safety deposit box, the evidence of Ryan's financial manipulation and lies about Dad's mental state. Maria listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "That son of a bitch," she said finally. "I never liked him, you know. Even back in high school, there was something off about the way he treated you." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Remember when you got accepted to state with that academic scholarship? You were so excited, but Ryan kept making comments about how you were abandoning the family and how Dad needed you to stay close to help with the business." I did remember. Ryan had been 22 then, fresh out of college himself and full of big plans for expanding Thompson Construction. He'd made it sound like my leaving for university was selfish, like I was prioritizing my own dreams over family loyalty. "And when you decided to major in education instead of business," Maria continued, "he kept telling people you were wasting your potential on a career that would never make real money." The memories came flooding back now. All those little comments over the years, the subtle undermining disguised as brotherly concern. The way he'd make jokes about my quaint little teaching job at family gatherings. The way he'd shake his head sadly whenever I mentioned wanting to buy a house, saying things like, "On a teacher's salary? Be realistic, Jess." "He's been conditioning Dad to see you as irresponsible for years," Maria said, reading my expression. "This will thing isn't sudden. It's the culmination of a long-term campaign." She was right. Ryan hadn't just manipulated Dad during his final months. He'd been planting seeds of doubt about my capabilities and choices for years, so gradually and consistently that even I hadn't recognized the pattern. "What are you going to do?" Maria asked. I stared into my wine glass, watching the dark liquid swirl. "I'm going to fight him. Patricia thinks I have grounds to contest the will based on undue influence." "Good. It's about time you stopped letting him walk all over you." That stung, probably because it was true. I'd spent most of my adult life trying to keep peace in the family, smoothing over Ryan's rough edges, making excuses for his behavior, convincing myself that his arrogance and manipulation were just personality quirks rather than deliberate patterns of control. "The problem is money," I said. "Legal battles are expensive, and Ryan's got resources I don't have. Plus, he's got Amanda's family money behind him if he needs it." Maria was quiet for a moment. "Maybe you don't need to outspend him. Maybe you just need to make sure the truth comes out." She had a point. In a town like Millbrook, reputation mattered more than money. Ryan's real estate business depended on trust and community connections. If people knew he'd manipulated his dying father and stolen his sister's inheritance, it would damage more than just his family relationships. But as I walked back to my apartment that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Dad had been methodical about documenting Ryan's pressure campaign, careful about preserving evidence of the financial manipulation, specific about wanting me to know the truth. But there had to be more. Dad was too thorough to leave loose ends, and he'd been suspicious of Ryan's motives for months before his death. The next morning brought Indian summer warmth that felt incongruous with the October calendar. I'd called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 5 times in 7 years of teaching, and spent the early hours reviewing every document from the safety deposit box. The bank transfers bothered me most. $40,000 over 2 years, all supposedly for house repairs and emergencies that had never materialized. I decided to drive out to Ryan's house in Willowbrook Estates, not to confront him, but to observe. to see what $40,000 of emergency expenses had actually purchased. The development where Ryan lived was a testament to nouveau riche aspiration, with oversized houses crammed onto undersized lots and homeowners association rules that governed everything from mailbox colors to acceptable landscaping choices. Ryan's house fit the aesthetic perfectly, all angles and windows, with a 3-car garage and professional landscaping that screamed, "Successful businessman lives here." What I saw in his driveway made my stomach drop. A brand new Audi SUV with temporary tags sat next to Amanda's BMW. The Audi had to be worth at least $60,000, and it definitely hadn't been there when I'd attended Dad's funeral, reception at their house 3 weeks earlier. I parked across the street and pulled out my phone, pretending to text while actually taking photos. Through the large front windows, I could see into their living room, where new furniture had replaced the leather sectional they'd had last Christmas. Everything looked expensive, coordinated, recently purchased. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Patricia Martinez. "Jessica, I've been thinking about your father's estate overnight," she said without preamble. "There are some things we need. To discuss that, I couldn't say in front of Ryan yesterday." "What kind of things?" "The kind that might constitute fraud. Can you come to my office this afternoon and bring everything from the safety deposit box?" Fraud. The word sent ice through my veins, but also a strange sense of vindication. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being paranoid or greedy. Something genuinely wrong had happened. Something serious enough to make a conservative small-town lawyer use words like fraud. I drove straight to Patricia's office, taking the photos from Dad's camera and the bank statements that showed the mysterious transfers to Ryan. Patricia reviewed everything with the focused attention of someone building a legal case. "These bank transfers are concerning," she said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Particularly because they coincide with your father's will modifications. Every time Ryan received money from your father, your inheritance portion decreased in the subsequent will draft." She spread out a timeline on her desk. "Look at this pattern. In January, Ryan gets $5,000 for roof repairs. 2 weeks later, your father changes his will to reduce your inheritance from 50% to 40%. In March, another $3,000 for furnace problems. Another will modification reducing your share to 30%. The correlation was undeniable. Ryan had been essentially purchasing my inheritance in installments, convincing Dad to fund his lifestyle while simultaneously arguing that I couldn't be trusted with financial responsibility. "But here's what's most troubling," Patricia continued. She pulled out a document I hadn't seen before. "Your father came to see me 2 days before he died, not just the day before as I mentioned yesterday. He was agitated, more upset than I'd ever seen him." She handed me a handwritten note in Dad's shaky script. "He wanted me to research whether he could press charges against Ryan for elder financial abuse. He'd figured out that the money he'd been giving your brother wasn't going toward house repairs or family emergencies." The note was barely legible, but I could make out key phrases. Ryan lied about repairs, money for his new car. Should have listened to Jessica. "How did he find out?" I asked. "He hired a contractor to get estimates for the roof work Ryan claimed to have done. When the contractor told him the roof was in the same condition it had been 2 years earlier, your father started questioning everything." Patricia pulled out her desk phone and dialed a number. "Tom, this is Pat Martinez. I need you to pull the transaction records for Robert Thompson's account, specifically the transfers to Ryan Thompson." "Yes, I'll hold." While we waited, she explained what she suspected. If Ryan was receiving money under false pretenses, claiming it was for expenses that never occurred, that's financial elder abuse. Combined with the undue influence over the will, it could void his inheritance entirely. Tom Hendricks came, back on the line with information that made Patricia's eyebrows rise. She took careful notes, asking for specific dates and amounts, cross-referencing the bank transfers with the timeline of will modifications. "Jessica," she said after hanging up. Those transfers to Ryan weren't just regular payments. They were all made within 24 hours of him visiting your father. And according to the bank's records, your father called twice to try to reverse the transfers, but was told it was too late. Dad had tried to stop the payments. He'd realized he was being taken advantage of and had attempted to protect himself. But Ryan had been too quick, too practiced at manipulating the situation. "There's something else," Patricia said quietly. "Your father made one final change to his will that Ryan doesn't know about. The day before he died, when he was too weak to complete the codicil, he signed a document revoking Ryan's power of attorney." I stared at her. Ryan had power of attorney? Limited financial power of attorney, yes. Your father granted it 6 months ago when he was first hospitalized for pneumonia. But he revoked it the day before he died, specifically citing concerns about misuse of funds. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Ryan had legal authority to access Dad's accounts, to make financial decisions on his behalf, to control aspects of his estate while he was still alive. And Dad had been so concerned about abuse of that power that he'd used his final lucid moments to revoke it. "Patricia, what does this mean for the will?" She leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked like a lawyer preparing for battle rather than a family friend handling routine paperwork. "It means your brother may have committed several felonies. Elder financial abuse, fraud, and possibly forgery, if he signed any documents using that power of attorney after your father revoked it. And it means the will he inherited under was the product of systematic coercion and manipulation." I felt something shift inside me, like a locked door finally opening. This wasn't just about money or houses or family disputes. This was about justice for a vulnerable old man who'd been systematically robbed and manipulated by his own son. "What do we do next?" Patricia smiled, and it wasn't the gentle expression I was used to seeing from her. It was the smile of someone who'd practiced law for 30 years and had finally encountered a case that made her genuinely angry. "We gather every piece of evidence your father left us. We document every lie Ryan told, every dollar he stole, every time he manipulated your father's decision-making. And then we make sure the probate court knows exactly what kind of man inherited Robert Thompson's estate." She stood up and walked to her filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder labeled Thompson Estate, Supplemental Documentation. "Your father wasn't just recording conversations, Jessica. He was building a case, and he left very specific instructions about what he wanted done if anything happened to him before he could correct his mistakes." I left Patricia's office that afternoon with a new understanding of my father's final months. He hadn't been a confused old man manipulated by a greedy son. He'd been a sharp, methodical contractor who'd recognized a problem and set about documenting it with the same attention to detail he'd brought to every job site. Dad had known exactly what Ryan was doing, and he'd made sure I would have everything. I needed to stop him. The question now wasn't whether I could fight Ryan for my inheritance. The question was whether I was prepared to destroy my brother's life to honor my father's wishes. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook, past the elementary school where I taught children about fairness and consequences, past the construction sites where Dad had built half the buildings in town, I realized that the little girl who'd always tried to keep everyone happy was finally, permanently gone. In her place was a woman who understood that sometimes love means holding people accountable for their choices, even when those people are family. Especially when those people are family. I woke up Saturday morning with the kind of clarity that comes after a sleepless night spent staring at ceiling cracks and making life-altering decisions. The evidence spread across my dining table told a story that demanded action, not just grief. Dad had spent his final months building a case against Ryan, documenting every lie and manipulation with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent 40 years in construction, where details mattered and shortcuts killed people. The decision to fight felt like stepping off a cliff, but staying silent felt like betraying everything Dad had tried to protect. I wasn't going to let Ryan's theft and manipulation stand as the final chapter of our father's story. My first stop was Thompson Construction's old office building on Main Street. Dad had sold the business 3 years ago when his arthritis made daily job site visits impossible, but he'd kept the office space as storage for company records and equipment. Ryan had the key, of course, but Dad had given me a spare years ago for emergencies. This qualified. The building smelled like sawdust and motor oil, familiar scents that reminded me of childhood Saturday mornings when Dad would bring me along to help with paperwork while he organized job schedules. The main office still had his old desk, the same metal filing cabinets he'd used since the 80s, and boxes of records that Ryan had apparently never bothered to sort through. I found what I was looking for in the third filing cabinet: Dad's personal financial records going back 5 years. These weren't just bank statements, but detailed ledgers where he'd tracked every expense, every payment, every financial decision, with the obsessive attention to detail that had made Thompson Construction successful. Dad had been old school about record keeping, writing everything down by hand in composition notebooks that he'd numbered and dated. The notebooks revealed a pattern that made my stomach turn. Starting 18 months ago, right around the time Ryan had gotten married and bought his first house in Willowbrook Estates, Dad's notes showed increasing requests for loans and gifts. "Ryan needs help with down payment," read one entry from March of last year. "Amanda's medical bills from miscarriage," read another from June. But here's what chilled me. Next to several of these entries, Dad had written question marks in red ink, small notations that showed he'd been skeptical even as he'd written the checks. "Verify roof estimate," he'd written next to a $5,000 payment supposedly for emergency repairs. "Call contractor directly," appeared next to another. "Large expense claim." I photographed every page, every notation, every red ink question mark that showed Dad's growing suspicion about Ryan's honesty. The evidence was building into something overwhelming, something that painted a picture of systematic elder abuse that went far beyond simple sibling rivalry over inheritance. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Hey Jess, hope you're doing okay. Ryan's worried about you. Want to come to Sunday dinner tomorrow? The kids miss their Aunt Jess." The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. Amanda, who'd barely spoken to me at Dad's funeral, suddenly reaching out with fake concern and using her children as emotional leverage. The message felt calculated, probably coordinated with Ryan as part of some strategy to manage my reaction to the will. I typed back, "Thanks for thinking of me. I'm taking some time to process everything." Her response came immediately. "Of course. This must be so hard. Ryan mentioned you seemed upset about the will situation, but you know he'll take care of you. He's already talking about letting you stay in the house as long as you need." Letting me stay. In the house where I'd grown up, where I'd cared for both dying parents, where every room held memories that belonged to me as much as anyone. The casual dismissal of my connection to that place, the assumption that I should be grateful for Ryan's charity, made anger burn hot in my chest. Instead of responding to Amanda, I called Maria. "I need your help with something that might get complicated." An hour later, Maria sat at my kitchen table reviewing the evidence I'd gathered, her teacher's mind processing information with the same systematic approach she used for lesson planning. As a fourth-grade teacher, Maria dealt with parents who lied about their children's behavior, administrators who made promises they couldn't keep, and budgets that never reflected actual needs. She understood institutional manipulation better than most people. "This is criminal," she said finally, setting down the photographs of Dad's financial records. "Ryan didn't just influence your father's will, he defrauded him out of tens of thousands of dollars using fake emergencies and non-existent repairs." I know, but knowing it and proving it in court are different things. Maria leaned back in her chair. "What if you didn't have to prove it in court? What if you just had to prove it to the right people? She had that look she got when she was developing a particularly creative lesson plan. The expression that usually meant she'd found an unconventional solution to a complex problem. "Think about it," she continued. "Ryan's real estate business depends on his reputation in this community. His clients need to trust him with the biggest financial decisions of their lives. What happens to that trust when people find out he's been stealing from his own dying father?" The idea was tempting but felt dangerous. "You're talking about destroying his career." "I'm talking about natural consequences. If Ryan committed fraud, if he manipulated a vulnerable elderly man, if he lied and stole and cheated to get what he wanted, then people have a right to know what kind of person they're doing business with." Maria was right, but the teacher in me worried about collateral damage. Ryan had 2 young children who would suffer if his business collapsed. Amanda might be complicit in his schemes, but Tyler and Sophia were innocent. They were my niece and nephew, even if their parents treated me like an inconvenience. "There's another way," Maria said, reading my hesitation. "What if you gave Ryan a chance to make things right? Present him with the evidence, show him what you know, and offer him a choice. Make restitution and honor your father's real wishes, or face the consequences of having his crimes made public." The approach appealed to me because it felt more like justice than revenge. Dad had always believed in giving people opportunities to do the right thing, even when they'd made serious mistakes. He'd fired employees for stealing tools or time, but he'd also rehired some of them when they'd proven their character had changed. "I'll need more than just the financial records," I said. "I need proof that the house repairs never happened. Documentation that the emergencies were fake, evidence that Ryan knowingly lied to Dad about where the money was going." Maria smiled. "Good thing you know someone who's excellent at research projects." We spent Sunday morning developing what Maria called our investigation plan. As elementary school teachers, we were both skilled at breaking complex problems into manageable tasks, organizing information systematically, and finding creative ways to uncover truth when children weren't being entirely honest about their behavior. Our first stop was Miller's Hardware on Oak Street, where Dad had maintained an account for Thompson construction supplies for over 30 years. Old Mr. Miller remembered Dad fondly and was eager to help when I explained I was settling estate matters. "Bob was one of the good ones," Miller said, pulling out account records. "Always paid on time, never tried to return materials he'd damaged himself. Last couple years, he mostly just bought small stuff for projects around his house." "What? About roofing materials?" I asked. "Or furnace parts? Major repair supplies?" Miller scratched his gray beard. "Nope, can't say he bought anything like that. Last big purchase would have been that deck stain he got 2 summers ago. Everything else was just maintenance stuff. Light bulbs, paint touch-up, garden supplies. No roofing materials. No furnace parts. No evidence of the major repairs that had supposedly required thousands of dollars from Dad's savings." Our next stop was Peterson Heating and Air, the company that had serviced Dad's furnace for 15 years. The owner, Dave Peterson, was a contemporary of Dad's who'd known our family since before I was born. "Sorry for your loss, Jessica," Dave said when I explained why I was there. "Your dad was good people. Last time I was out to his place was maybe 6 months ago for the annual cleaning and inspection." "Was there anything wrong with the system? Any repairs needed?" Dave consulted his service records. "Nope, furnace was running fine. Old, but well-maintained. I told Bob it'd probably need replacement in the next 5 years, but there was no emergency. Certainly nothing that would require immediate repair work." Another lie exposed. Another fake emergency that had cost Dad thousands of dollars. By Sunday afternoon, I had documentation from 4 different contractors and service providers, all confirming the same thing. No major repairs had been done on Dad's house in the past 2 years. The roof repairs, furnace emergencies, plumbing, crises and electrical problems that had supposedly required Ryan's intervention and Dad's money had never occurred. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed one more piece of the puzzle. I needed to know exactly what Ryan had done with the money he'd stolen from Dad. Monday morning, I called in another sick day and drove to the courthouse to research public records. Property deeds, vehicle registrations, business licenses, all. The documentation that showed how people spent large amounts of money was available for anyone willing to dig through the files. What I found exceeded my worst expectations. Ryan had purchased his Audi SUV 3 days after receiving a $7,000 emergency loan from Dad. The down payment on his house expansion project had been made the same week Dad had given him $5,000 for urgent roof repairs. Amanda's jewelry purchases, their family vacation to Disney World, the new furniture I'd seen through their windows. All of it correlated with money Ryan had taken from Dad under false pretenses. But the most damning discovery was a business investment Ryan had made 6 months ago. He'd bought into a commercial real estate partnership in Columbus, contributing $50,000 to the deal. The timing coincided exactly with Dad's largest will modification, the change that had reduced my inheritance from 30% to 0. Ryan hadn't just stolen money from Dad. He'd used that money to build wealth while simultaneously convincing Dad that I was too irresponsible to be trusted with an inheritance. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot, surrounded by evidence of my brother's systematic theft and manipulation, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. This wasn't family drama or sibling rivalry. This was criminal behavior that had victimized a dying old man who'd trusted his son completely. The time for family loyalty and keeping the peace was over. That evening, I called Patricia Martinez at her home. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear her television in the background, the comfortable sounds of a quiet evening disrupted by urgent legal business. "I have everything," I told her without preamble. "Proof that none of the repairs happened, documentation of where the money really went, evidence that Ryan used Dad's money for personal investments while lying about the purposes." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "Jessica, what you're describing isn't just undue influence on the will. It's elder financial abuse, fraud, and possibly other felonies. Are you prepared for what that means?" "What does it mean?" "It means, if we pursue this fully, Ryan could face criminal charges. It means your family dispute becomes a public legal matter. It means everyone in Millbrook will know what happened, and Ryan's business and reputation will be destroyed." The weight of that possibility settled on my shoulders like a heavy coat. I thought about Tyler and Sophia, about Amanda's probable financial dependence on Ryan's income, about the ripple effects that would spread through our extended family and community. But then I thought about Dad, dying in a hospital bed while worrying that he'd made terrible mistakes about his estate. I thought about him trying to reverse bank transfers, revoking Ryan's power of attorney, desperately attempting to document the truth in his final weeks, because he knew something was fundamentally wrong. "My father spent his last months of life thinking he might be losing his mind," I said. "Ryan convinced him that his confusion and memory problems meant he couldn't trust his own judgment about his children. Dad died believing he'd made the right decision to cut me out of his will because Ryan had systematically destroyed his confidence in me. I understand." "Do you?" "Because I'm not sure I understood until right now. This isn't about money, Patricia. It's about a son who psychologically abused his dying father for financial gain. It's about elder abuse that went beyond stealing money, to stealing peace of mind and family trust." Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. "What do you want to do, Jessica?" I stared out my apartment window at the quiet street below, at the ordinary houses where ordinary families were having ordinary Monday evening conversations about homework and dinner plans and weekend activities. Normal families where adult children didn't manipulate dying parents, where brothers didn't steal from sisters, where love wasn't conditional on financial compliance. "I want to give Ryan one chance to make this right," I said. One opportunity to confess what he did and make full restitution. If he chooses to fight instead of taking responsibility, then we take everything we know to the probate court and let justice run its course. That's fair, more than fair, given what he's done. Can you arrange a meeting, something formal, in your office where everything is documented? Of course. When? I thought about my teaching schedule, about the third graders who were counting on me to be present and focused despite my personal crisis. Wednesday was a teacher work day with no students, which would give me time to recover from whatever happened in Patricia's office. Wednesday afternoon. And Patricia, I want the meeting recorded, just like Dad did with his conversations about the will. I want everything on the record. I'll set it up, Jessica. Yes? Your father would be proud of how you're handling this. He raised a strong daughter. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by evidence of my brother's crimes and felt strangely peaceful. For the first time since Dad's death, I wasn't confused or conflicted about what to do. The path forward was clear, even if it led through painful confrontations and family destruction. I was going to honor Dad's memory by ensuring that truth and justice prevailed over manipulation and theft. I was going to prove that the quiet daughter, the one who'd supposedly lacked ambition and practical skills, was actually strong enough to hold a criminal accountable, even when that criminal was her own brother. Tuesday morning, I returned to work with the focused energy of someone who'd finally found their purpose. My third graders were working on a unit about community helpers and local government, learning about how laws protect people and why rules matter in civilized society. The irony wasn't lost on me as I taught 8-year-olds about justice while preparing to seek it for my father. During lunch break, I received a text from Patricia. Meeting scheduled for Wednesday at 3 p.m. Ryan has been notified that it concerns irregularities in your father's estate that require immediate attention. He'll be there. That afternoon, I spent an hour after school organizing all my evidence into a clear, chronological presentation. Bank records, contractor statements, public property documents, Dad's handwritten notes, everything arranged, to tell the story of systematic elder abuse with undeniable clarity. I also wrote a letter to Ryan, something I planned to read aloud before presenting the evidence. It wasn't angry or accusatory, just a clear statement of facts and an offer of resolution that honored both justice and family relationships. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical October weather that matched my mood. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, the navy suit I wore to parent conferences and school board meetings. If this was going to be a confrontation, I wanted to look like someone who deserved to be taken seriously. At 2:30, I walked into Patricia's office carrying a folder full of evidence and a heart full of righteous determination. Ryan was already there, sitting in the same chair he'd occupied during the will reading 5 days earlier. But his confident demeanor had been replaced by something that looked like wariness, possibly even fear. Amanda sat beside him, which surprised me. I hadn't expected her to be involved in the meeting, but her presence suggested Ryan understood the seriousness of the situation. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia said formally. "Jessica has requested this meeting to discuss concerns about Robert Thompson's estate and certain financial transactions that occurred before his death." I looked directly at Ryan as I opened my folder. For just a moment, I saw a flash of the big brother who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework and defended me from neighborhood bullies. But that person had been gone for years, replaced by someone who would steal from his own dying father. "Ryan," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "I know what you did. I have proof of every lie you told Dad, every dollar you stole, every fake emergency you used to manipulate him. I'm going to give you one chance to make this right before I take everything I know to the authorities." The silence in Patricia's office was absolute. Outside, I could hear normal life continuing. Cars passing on Oak Avenue, The pharmacy bell chiming as customers entered, the sounds of a small town going about its business while a family confronted the worst kind of betrayal. Ryan's face had gone pale, but his eyes still held defiance. "I don't know what you think you found, but I found Dad's financial records showing $40,000 in transfers to you for repairs that never happened," I interrupted. "I found proof that you bought a car, invested in real estate, and funded your lifestyle with money you stole by lying to a dying man." Amanda gripped Ryan's arm, her knuckles white against his dark suit sleeve. "I found Dad's notes showing he was suspicious of your requests, that he tried to verify your claims, that he attempted to reverse payments when he realized you were lying. I found evidence that you abused your power of attorney to access his accounts even after he'd revoked that authority." Ryan started to speak, but I held up my hand. "Most importantly, I found proof that Dad knew what you were doing. He spent his final weeks building a case against you, documenting your lies and manipulation because he realized he'd been wrong to trust you with his financial decisions and his will." I pulled out the letter I'd written and began reading it aloud, my voice gaining strength with each word. The meeting that would determine both our futures had finally begun. The letter trembled slightly in my hands as I read it aloud, but my voice remained steady. "Ryan, for 29 years, I believed you were the brother who would always protect me. I defended your actions to friends who questioned your character. I made excuses for behavior that I now realize was calculated manipulation designed to undermine my relationship with our father." Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his confident businessman facade cracking around the edges. Amanda's grip on his arm had tightened to the point where her fingernails were leaving marks through his suit jacket. "I'm not reading this letter to humiliate you," I continued. "I'm reading it because Dad taught us both that people deserve a chance to make things right when they've made mistakes. But what you did wasn't a mistake, Ryan. It was a systematic campaign of elder abuse that lasted 2 years and cost our father $40,000 and his peace of mind." I set the letter down and picked up the first piece of evidence, a bank statement showing the transfer patterns that coincided with Ryan's supposed emergencies. "Every time you told Dad you needed money for house repairs, you used that money for personal purchases within days. The $7,000 for emergency roof work became your down payment on the Audi. The $5,000 for urgent furnace repairs paid for your investment in the Columbus commercial real estate deal." Patricia had started her digital recorder, the same model Dad had used to document his concerns about Ryan's influence. The symmetry felt appropriate, like Dad was somehow present to witness his son finally being held accountable. "Those aren't crimes," Ryan said, finding his voice. "Dad gave me that money willingly. If I used it for other purposes, that's between him and me." "It's fraud when you obtain money under false pretenses," Patricia interjected quietly. "When you claim funds are needed for specific emergency repairs that never occurred, that constitutes criminal deception." Amanda spoke for the first time since entering the office. "This is ridiculous. Ryan was trying to help his father maintain his independence. Sometimes that meant handling expenses differently than originally planned." The smoothness of her response suggested this wasn't the first time they'd rehearsed justifications for Ryan's behavior. I wondered how long Amanda had known about the theft, whether she'd been complicit from the beginning or simply willfully blind to the source of their improved lifestyle. "Help him maintain independence?" I pulled out the contractor statements I'd gathered. Dave Peterson from Peterson Heating confirmed Dad's furnace was working fine and needed no emergency repairs. Miller's Hardware has no record of Dad purchasing roofing materials. 3 different contractors told me no major work had been done on Dad's house in the past 2 years. I spread the statements across Patricia's desk like playing cards in a winning poker hand. "But here's what really matters," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Dad knew you were lying. He hired contractors to verify your claims about necessary repairs. He tried to reverse bank transfers when he realized the emergencies were fake. He revoked your power of attorney because he discovered you were abusing it. Ryan's face had gone from pale to flushed, anger replacing his initial wariness. Dad was confused and paranoid in his final months. The medications made him suspicious of everyone, including me. Dr. Peterson's letter confirms Dad was mentally competent and his medications weren't affecting his judgment, I replied, producing the physician's statement. Dad wasn't confused, Ryan. He was being systematically defrauded by his own son, and he figured it out. Patricia leaned forward. Ryan, the evidence Jessica has gathered is compelling enough to support criminal charges for elder financial abuse, fraud, and possibly forgery if you used the power of attorney after your father revoked it. The prosecutor's office takes these cases seriously, especially when they involve vulnerable elderly victims. Amanda's composure finally cracked. You can't be serious. Ryan made some poor decisions, but this is family business. You can't destroy his career and our children's future over a family dispute. This isn't a family dispute, I said, looking directly at her. This is a crime that victimized a dying man who trusted his son completely. Dad spent his final weeks thinking he might be losing his mind because Ryan convinced him his memory and judgment were unreliable. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of Patricia's recorder and the distant sounds of downtown Millbrook continuing its normal Tuesday afternoon rhythm. I could hear children walking past on their way home from school, their voices bright with the kind of innocence I'd been helping to nurture for 7 years as an elementary teacher. What do you want? Ryan asked finally, his voice stripped of its usual confidence. I opened my folder to the final document I'd prepared, a settlement proposal I'd drafted with Patricia's guidance. I want you to make full restitution for every dollar you stole from Dad under false pretenses. $43,000 plus interest to be paid within 90 days. I want a written confession acknowledging what you did and apologizing for the harm you caused. And I want Dad's will to be modified to reflect his true intentions before you manipulated him. Ryan laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want me to give you $40,000 and confess to crimes I didn't commit? That's not happening, Jess. The alternative is that Patricia and I take everything we've discovered to the probate court and the prosecutor's office. Your theft becomes public record. Your real estate clients learn that you defrauded your own dying father. Your business license gets reviewed by the state board. Your reputation in this community becomes synonymous with elder abuse. Amanda was staring at her husband with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, maybe, or the dawning realization that the comfortable lifestyle she'd been enjoying was built on stolen money. I need time to think, Ryan said. You have until Friday, Patricia replied. If we don't have your response by 5 p.m., Jessica will file her petition to contest the will on Monday morning. The evidence will become part of the public record at that point. Ryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is blackmail. This is justice, I corrected. Dad spent 2 years being manipulated and robbed by someone he trusted completely. I'm giving you an opportunity to take responsibility and make amends, which is more consideration than you showed him. Amanda gathered her purse and followed. Ryan toward the door, but she paused and looked back at me. What about Tyler and Sophia? She asked. What about your niece and nephew who love their father and don't understand why their family is falling apart? The question hit exactly where Amanda intended it to, in the part of my heart that had always prioritized family harmony over personal justice. But I thought about Dad lying in his hospital bed, worried about his mental capacity, convinced by his own son that his confusion and memory problems meant he couldn't trust his own judgment about his children. I love Tyler and Sophia, I said, but loving them doesn't mean enabling their father's criminal behavior. They deserve to grow up understanding that actions have consequences and that family loyalty doesn't excuse theft and manipulation. After Ryan and Amanda left, Patricia and I sat in the quiet of her office processing what had just occurred. The confrontation had gone differently than I'd expected. I'd anticipated more denial, more attempts to justify Ryan's actions, perhaps even genuine remorse. Instead, I'd encountered defiance and the kind of entitlement that suggested Ryan still didn't fully understand the severity of what he'd done. "What do you think he'll choose?" I asked. Patricia considered the question carefully. "In my experience, people who commit this kind of systematic fraud don't usually accept responsibility willingly. Ryan has spent 2 years justifying his behavior to himself. He's probably convinced that he deserved that money, that he was helping your father by managing his finances, that his lies were somehow protective rather than exploitative. So you think he'll fight?" "I think he'll try to find a way to avoid consequences while maintaining his victim narrative. He might offer partial restitution or claim the money was loans rather than gifts, or argue that your father was more confused than the medical records indicate." The possibility didn't discourage me. If anything, it strengthened my resolve. Dad had trusted me with evidence of Ryan's crimes for a reason. He'd documented everything, preserved proof, and made sure I would have the tools necessary to seek justice. I wasn't going to dishonor that trust by accepting anything less than full accountability. Wednesday and Thursday passed in a strange suspension of normal time. I taught my third graders about community helpers and local government while privately preparing for a legal battle that would determine whether my brother faced consequences for defrauding our father. The juxtaposition felt surreal, explaining to 8-year-olds how laws protect people while knowing that justice for Dad depended on my willingness to use those same laws against family. Maria covered my class Friday afternoon so I could be at Patricia's office when Ryan's deadline arrived. 5 o'clock came and went with no word from my brother. At 5:15, Patricia's phone rang. "It's Ryan," she said, answering on speaker so I could hear the conversation. "Patricia, I've been thinking about Jessica's ultimatum." Ryan's voice sounded strained, lacking its usual smooth confidence. "I'm willing to discuss a compromise." "What kind of compromise?" "I can provide some financial assistance to Jessica, maybe 10 or 15,000, to help her get established somewhere. But I'm not admitting to crimes I didn't commit, and I'm not giving up my inheritance based on conspiracy theories about Dad's mental state." The offer was insulting in its inadequacy. $10,000 when he'd stolen more than 40. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. No recognition that Dad had been victimized. Just a token payment designed to make the problem disappear while allowing Ryan to maintain his narrative of innocence. "That's not acceptable," I said into the speaker. Phone. "The evidence shows you defrauded Dad out of $43,000. Partial restitution isn't justice. Jess, be reasonable. I've got 2 kids and a mortgage. I can't just liquidate everything because you've misinterpreted some financial transactions." Misinterpreted. Even now, faced with overwhelming evidence of his systematic theft, Ryan was trying to gaslight me into doubting what I knew to be true. "The offer is rejected," Patricia said formally. "We'll file the petition to contest the will Monday morning." "Wait," Ryan's voice carried a note of panic. "What if I can get 25,000? That's more than fair for what amounts to family financial misunderstandings." Family financial misunderstandings. Ryan's ability to minimize his criminal behavior was almost impressive in its audacity. "Goodbye, Ryan," I said, and Patricia ended the call. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if October was trying to make amends for the previous week's gray drizzle. I dressed in my best professional outfit and met Patricia at the courthouse, carrying copies of all the evidence Dad had helped me gather. The probate clerk accepted our petition to contest Robert Thompson's will, officially beginning the legal process that would determine whether Ryan's inheritance had been obtained through fraud and undue influence. The filing would become public record, meaning anyone in Millbrook could access the details of our family's dispute and the allegations against Ryan. "How long before this gets resolved?" I asked Patricia as we walked back to her car. "Contested probate cases can take 6 months to 2 years, depending on how aggressively Ryan fights the allegations. But Jessica, Once this petition becomes public knowledge, the damage to Ryan's reputation will be immediate and probably irreversible. I thought about Tyler and Sophia, about the classmates who might tease them about their father being accused of elder abuse. I thought about Amanda, who might be genuinely unaware of the extent of Ryan's criminal behavior. I thought about extended family members who would have to choose sides in a legal battle that would define our relationships for years to come. Then I thought about Dad, lying in a hospital bed convinced he was losing his mind because his own son had systematically destroyed his confidence in his own judgment. I thought about the man who'd built Thompson Construction from nothing, who'd employed half the tradesmen in Millbrook over the years, who'd donated anonymously to the school district and the volunteer fire department, reduced to doubting his mental capacity because Ryan had gaslit him so effectively. Dad deserves justice, I said, whatever the cost. The story broke in the Millbrook Gazette 3 days later. Local businessman accused of elder abuse in will contest read the headline, above an article that laid out the basic allegations without editorial comment. The reporter had clearly done research, interviewing contractors who confirmed that no major repairs had been done on Robert Thompson's house, speaking with bank officials who verified the suspicious transfer patterns and reviewing public records that showed Ryan's expensive purchases coinciding with the alleged thefts. By Thursday, Ryan's real estate office had fielded dozens of calls from concerned clients asking about the allegations. 2 major development deals had been put on hold pending resolution of the legal case. The State Real Estate Licensing Board had opened an investigation into Ryan's professional conduct. Amanda called me Friday evening, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked without preamble. "Ryan's business is collapsing. We might lose our house. The kids are being questioned at school about their father being a thief." The pain in her voice was genuine, but I felt no guilt about it. Amanda had sat in Patricia's office and listened to evidence of systematic elder abuse, then tried to minimize it as family financial misunderstandings. She'd chosen to enable Ryan's behavior rather than encourage him to take responsibility. "I'm sorry Tyler and Sophia are being affected," I said, "but their father chose to commit crimes against his dying parent. The consequences they're experiencing are the natural result of his decisions. He's willing to negotiate $30,000 and a private apology. No admission of criminal wrongdoing, but acknowledgement that some financial decisions were poorly handled. Still trying to control the narrative, still refusing to accept full responsibility, still attempting to frame systematic fraud as poor judgment rather than deliberate criminal behavior. The offer is still rejected, Amanda. Full restitution, written confession, or we proceed to trial." She hung up without saying goodbye. The legal process moved slowly but inexorably toward resolution. Ryan hired an expensive attorney from Columbus who tried every technical challenge available, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, that Dad had been more mentally impaired than medical records indicated, that family financial arrangements shouldn't be subject to criminal scrutiny. But Patricia had done her job well. Dad's documentation was thorough, the evidence was overwhelming, and Ryan's pattern of behavior was too clear to dismiss. The recorded conversations where Dad expressed concerns about being manipulated, the medical records confirming his mental competency, the contractor statements proving the repairs never occurred, the financial records showing exactly where the stolen money had gone. It all painted an undeniable picture of systematic elder abuse. 6 months after filing the petition, we reached a settlement. Ryan agreed to full restitution of $43,000 plus legal fees, totaling nearly $50,000. He provided a written statement acknowledging that he had misrepresented the purposes for which he requested financial assistance from his father, and expressing regret for any harm caused by these misrepresentations. It wasn't the full confession I'd wanted, but it was legal acknowledgement of wrongdoing that would remain in the public record permanently. The will was modified to reflect Dad's intentions before Ryan's manipulation. I inherited 40% of the estate, including the family home on Maple Street. The remaining 60% was divided between Ryan and charitable donations to organizations Dad had supported during his lifetime. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that Dad's final months of worry and confusion had been validated, that his concerns about being manipulated weren't symptoms of mental decline but accurate assessments of his son's criminal behavior. I moved into the family home on a warm Saturday in May, exactly 8 months after Dad's death. The house needed work. The roof really did need replacement. The furnace was approaching the end of its useful life, and the kitchen hadn't been updated since the 1980s. But it was home in a way my apartment had never been, filled with memories of parents who'd loved me unconditionally and taught me that doing the right thing mattered more than keeping the peace. Ryan's real estate business never fully recovered from the scandal. Some clients stayed loyal, but enough left that he was forced to downsize significantly. He and Amanda sold their house in Willowbrook Estates and moved to a modest neighborhood closer to downtown. The children adjusted, as children do, and I made sure they knew their Aunt Jessica loved them regardless of the complicated relationship between their parents and me. Maria helped me organize a housewarming party that filled Dad's house with laughter for the first time since Mom's death. Teachers from our school, neighbors from the old neighborhood, contractors who'd worked with Dad over the years. People who understood that sometimes family loyalty means holding family members accountable for their choices. As evening settled over Millbrook and the last guests headed home, I sat on Dad's front porch swing and thought about the woman I'd been 8 months earlier. The passive daughter who'd accepted manipulation as normal family dynamics, who'd prioritized peace over justice, who'd been convinced she lacked the strength and intelligence to handle real responsibility. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love sometimes requires difficult choices, that family relationships built on lies and manipulation aren't worth preserving, and that fighting for what's right is more important than avoiding conflict. Dad had left me more than just evidence of Ryan's crimes. He'd left me the opportunity to discover my own strength, to learn that the quiet daughter who'd chosen teaching over business success was actually capable of holding criminals accountable, even when those criminals shared her DNA. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the last text message Dad had sent me 2 days before his death. "Love you, sweetheart. You're stronger than you know." He'd been right about that, just as he'd been right about Ryan's manipulation and the importance of documenting the truth. Dad had spent his final weeks building a case not just for justice, but for my own empowerment. He'd known I would need evidence, support, and most importantly, confidence in my own capabilities. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, the sounds of a structure that had sheltered 3 generations of Thompsons. I was the last one now, the keeper of family history and the guardian of Dad's legacy. It was a responsibility I'd never expected, but one I was finally ready to embrace. Tomorrow, I would start planning the renovations the house actually needed, funded by the inheritance Ryan had tried to steal. I would create lesson plans for another year of teaching 3rd graders about justice and consequences and the importance of doing right even when it's difficult. I would continue building a life based on the values Dad and Mom had taught me, values that prioritized character over comfort and truth over convenience. But tonight, I simply sat on the porch swing where Dad used to read his evening paper, surrounded by the peace that comes from knowing you've honored the people who raised you and fought for justice even when the cost was high. The little girl, who'd always tried to make everyone happy, was gone forever. In her place sat a woman who understood that the most important person to make proud was the one looking back from the mirror, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable the people who've forgotten how to deserve it. The weight of $43,000 in documented theft sat heavy on my dining room table, spread across every surface in the form of bank statements, contractor receipts, and handwritten notes that told the story of my brother's systematic betrayal. Each piece of evidence represented another lie Ryan had told our dying father, another manipulation designed to steal not just money, but peace of mind from a vulnerable old man who'd trusted his son completely. I'd spent the weekend organizing everything chronologically, creating a timeline that showed the calculated nature of Ryan's deception. It wasn't random greed or opportunistic theft. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign that had begun almost immediately after Dad's cancer diagnosis, when Ryan realized our father's vulnerability could be monetized. The pattern was so clear it made my stomach turn. Every time Dad expressed doubt about Ryan's financial requests, my brother would escalate the emotional manipulation. Suddenly, the roof repairs weren't just necessary, they were urgent safety issues that could result in collapse. The furnace problems weren't minor maintenance. They were life-threatening emergencies that could leave Dad without heat in the middle of winter. Each lie built upon the previous one, creating a web of fake crises that justified increasingly large withdrawals from Dad's carefully maintained savings. But what haunted me most was the psychological dimension of Ryan's abuse. He hadn't just stolen money, he'd systematically undermined Dad's confidence in his own judgment. The recorded conversations Patricia had played revealed a dying man who'd begun questioning his mental capacity because his son kept telling him his concerns were symptoms of confusion and paranoia. Monday morning brought unseasonably cold October, weather that matched my mood as I prepared for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation of my life. Patricia had scheduled a follow-up meeting with Ryan and Amanda, ostensibly to discuss their response to my settlement proposal, but really to present the additional evidence I'd uncovered over the weekend. The new documentation was damning beyond anything I'd previously discovered. Dad's personal calendar, found in his bedroom desk, showed detailed notes about his growing suspicions of Ryan's honesty. Call Peterson Heating to verify Ryan's claim about furnace emergency, read one entry from 6 months before Dad's death. Check with Miller's Hardware about roofing materials Ryan says he ordered, appeared in Dad's careful handwriting 2 weeks later. More heartbreaking were the entries that revealed Dad's internal struggle with doubt about his own mental state. Ryan says I'm forgetting our conversations about repairs. Maybe he's right? Appeared multiple times, showing how effectively my brother had gaslit our father into questioning his own memory and judgment. The most devastating discovery was a letter Dad had started writing to me but never finished, found tucked inside his Bible. The shaky handwriting revealed a man desperate to communicate his concerns but afraid he might be wrong about his own son. Dear Jessica, the letter began, I need to tell you something about Ryan that's been troubling me. He keeps asking for money for house repairs, but when I drive by to check on the work, I don't see any evidence that anything has been done. When I ask him about it, he gets angry and tells me I'm confused about the timing. Maybe I am confused. The cancer treatments make everything foggy sometimes, but I've been keeping careful notes, and something doesn't add up. The letter broke off mid-sentence, as if Dad had lost courage to continue documenting his suspicions about his own son. The unfinished confession represented everything tragic about elder abuse within families: the victim's reluctance to believe their loved one could betray them, the self-doubt that comes from being consistently gaslit, the isolation that prevents them from seeking help or validation. I photographed the letter and calendar entries, adding them to the growing file of evidence that painted Ryan not just as a thief, but as someone who'd psychologically tormented a dying man for financial gain. The documentation would be crucial for the meeting with Ryan, showing that Dad's concerns about being manipulated weren't paranoid delusions, but accurate assessments of his son's criminal behavior. Patricia's office felt different when I arrived that afternoon, charged with the tension that comes before life-altering confrontations. Ryan and Amanda were already seated, their body language defensive and hostile. Gone was any pretense of family warmth or concern for my well-being. They'd clearly spent the weekend preparing for battle rather than considering accountability. Thank you for coming, Patricia said formally, activating her digital recorder. Jessica has additional evidence to present regarding the financial irregularities in your father's estate. I'd rehearsed this moment, but facing Ryan across Patricia's desk still felt surreal. This was the brother who'd taught me to drive, who'd walked me to school when neighborhood bullies made me afraid, who'd held my hand during Mom's funeral. But that person had been replaced by someone I no longer recognized, someone capable of systematic elder abuse for personal profit. Ryan, I found Dad's personal calendar and an unfinished letter he was writing to me about his concerns regarding your honesty, I said, placing the new evidence on Patricia's desk. These documents show that Dad was actively investigating your claims about house repairs and growing suspicious of your motives. Ryan barely glanced at the calendar entries before dismissing them. Dad was keeping notes about everything in his final months because the medications were making him paranoid and confused. Those entries prove he wasn't thinking clearly, not that I did anything wrong. The casual cruelty of using Dad's illness to justify his own deception was breathtaking. Ryan was essentially arguing that Dad's cancer treatments had made him too impaired to recognize theft, therefore the theft was acceptable. Dr. Peterson's medical records confirm Dad was mentally competent throughout his illness, I replied. His concerns about your dishonesty weren't symptoms of confusion. They were accurate assessments of your criminal behavior. Amanda leaned forward, her voice tight with controlled anger. This is harassment, Jessica. You're using our grief as an excuse to destroy Ryan's reputation and business over family financial arrangements that are none of your concern. Stealing $43,000 from a dying man isn't a family financial arrangement, I said. It's elder abuse, and it's a felony. Those weren't thefts, Ryan snapped. They were loans and gifts from a father who wanted to help his son succeed. If Dad had concerns later, that was the illness talking, not rational thought. Patricia cleared her throat. Ryan, the evidence suggests otherwise. Your father's calendar shows he was actively trying to verify your claims about repairs and expenses. He contacted contractors directly, trying to confirm work that had supposedly been done on his house. She opened Dad's calendar to specific entries I'd marked. Here he writes about calling Peterson Heating to verify your claim about a furnace emergency. Here he notes driving by his house to look for roofing work you said was completed. These aren't the actions of a confused man. These are the careful investigations of someone who suspects he's being lied to. Ryan's composure was beginning to crack. Dad was obsessing over details because the cancer treatments made him anxious and paranoid. He started questioning everything, including legitimate expenses and repairs. What repairs? I asked directly. I've contacted every contractor and service provider in Millbrook. None of them did major work on Dad's house in the past 2 years. The roof repairs, furnace emergencies, plumbing crises, electrical problems, none of it happened, Ryan. You don't understand how contracting works, he said, grasping for justification. Sometimes work gets done by subcontractors, or materials get ordered through different suppliers, or projects get handled informally through business connections. Then provide documentation. Show me receipts, work orders, contractor communications. Prove that even one of the emergencies you used to justify taking Dad's money actually occurred. Ryan fell silent, unable to produce evidence that didn't exist. The repairs had been fabricated, the emergencies manufactured, the entire justification for his financial requests built on lies designed to manipulate a trusting father. Amanda tried a different approach. Even if Ryan made some poor decisions about how he used money Dad gave him, that doesn't justify destroying our family and his business over what amounts to misunderstandings. Systematic fraud isn't a misunderstanding, Patricia interjected. Obtaining money through false pretenses is a crime, regardless of family relationships. I pulled out the final piece of evidence I'd discovered, a bank record showing Ryan had attempted to access Dad's accounts using his power of attorney 2 days after Dad had revoked that authority. This shows Ryan tried to withdraw money from Dad's checking account after Dad had already revoked his power of attorney, I said. That's not a misunderstanding or poor judgment. That's attempted theft using fraudulent legal authority. Ryan's face went white. The unauthorized withdrawal attempt was clear evidence of criminal intent, proving he'd known his access to Dad's accounts had been revoked, but had tried to use his expired power of attorney anyway. "I was handling ongoing expenses for Dad's care," he said weakly. "I didn't realize the power of attorney had been revoked." "Dad personally delivered the revocation papers to your office," Patricia said. "Our records show you signed for receipt of the documents. You knew your authority had been terminated, but you tried to access his accounts anyway." The room fell silent, except for the quiet hum of Patricia's recorder, documenting every word of Ryan's crumbling defense. Amanda stared at her husband, with an expression that suggested she was hearing some of these details for the first time. "What exactly do you want from us?" Amanda asked finally, her voice stripped of its earlier defiance. I opened my folder to the settlement agreement Patricia and I had drafted, a document that represented justice for Dad while still offering Ryan an opportunity to avoid criminal prosecution. Full restitution of the $43,000 Ryan stole, plus interest and legal fees, I said. A written confession acknowledging the fraud and expressing genuine remorse for the harm caused to Dad. Public acknowledgement that Dad was mentally competent and his concerns about being manipulated were justified. "And if we refuse?" Ryan asked. "Then we file criminal charges for elder financial abuse, fraud, and attempted theft. Your business license gets reviewed by the state board. Your real estate clients learn that you defrauded your own dying father. The evidence becomes public record permanently." Patricia leaned forward. "Ryan, I've practiced law for 30 years, and I've never seen a more clear-cut case of elder abuse. The evidence Jessica has gathered would easily support criminal conviction. The settlement offer is generous considering the severity of what you've done." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him calculating options, trying to find a way to avoid consequences while maintaining his victim narrative. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the documentation too thorough, the pattern of behavior too clear to dismiss or explain away. "I need time to think about this," he said finally. "You have until Friday at 5 p.m., Patricia replied. "If we don't have your acceptance by then, Jessica will file criminal charges Monday morning." After Ryan and Amanda left, I sat in Patricia's office feeling emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. For months, I'd carried the weight of knowing something was fundamentally wrong with Dad's estate planning, but lacking the evidence to prove it. Now, with Dad's careful documentation and my own investigation, the truth was undeniable. "Do you think he'll accept the settlement?" I asked Patricia. "Honestly, I think he'll try to negotiate a reduced amount or partial confession. People who commit this kind of systematic fraud rarely accept full responsibility willingly." Ryan has spent 2 years justifying his behavior to himself. He probably genuinely believes he deserved that money. What happens if he refuses? Then we proceed with criminal charges and civil litigation. It will be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally difficult. But Jessica, you have one of the strongest elder abuse cases I've ever seen. Your father documented everything with remarkable thoroughness. That evening, I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by evidence of my brother's crimes, and thought about Dad's final months. He'd been fighting 2 battles simultaneously, one against the cancer that was killing him, another against the son who was systematically robbing and manipulating him. Dad had won neither battle with his body, but he'd won the war for truth, by documenting Ryan's deception so thoroughly that justice was finally possible. Tuesday morning brought news that shocked me, despite everything I'd learned about Ryan's character. Maria called during my lunch break with information she'd heard from her cousin who worked at First National Bank. "Jessica, you need to know something," Maria said, her voice tight with anger. "Ryan tried to access your father's safe deposit box yesterday using an old power of attorney document." My blood went cold. "What happened?" "Bank security stopped him when they realized the power of attorney had been revoked. But Jessica, he had Amanda with him, and they were asking about box contents and access procedures like they were planning something." The attempted access to Dad's safe deposit box was beyond brazen. Ryan knew I'd found evidence of his crimes. In that box, knew the contents could support criminal charges, and was apparently trying to tamper with or destroy evidence of his own wrongdoing. I called Patricia immediately, and she confirmed that attempting to access the safe deposit box with revoked legal authority constituted another felony charge we could add to Ryan's growing list of crimes. "This changes everything," Patricia said. Ryan isn't just refusing to take responsibility for past crimes. He's actively attempting to commit new ones to cover up his previous behavior. Wednesday brought Ryan's response to our settlement offer, delivered through his expensive Columbus attorney. Instead of acceptance or reasonable negotiation, Ryan was claiming that I had coerced Dad into changing his will through emotional manipulation, that the evidence I'd gathered was selectively edited to support false accusations, and that any financial irregularities were the result of Dad's mental confusion rather than deliberate deception. The response was so disconnected from reality, so brazenly dishonest, that it finally convinced me Ryan was genuinely incapable of acknowledging his wrongdoing. He'd constructed such an elaborate justification for his behavior that he probably believed his own lies. "He's not going to confess," I told Patricia after reading his attorney's response. "He's going to fight this with everything he has." Then we proceed with criminal charges. Jessica, are you prepared for what that means? Public hearings, media attention, testimony about your father's final months, cross-examination about your family relationships. I thought about Tyler and Sophia, about the impact on their lives when their father's crimes became public knowledge. I thought about extended family members who would be forced to choose sides, about the small-town gossip that would follow me for years. I thought about the time, expense, and emotional toll of a criminal trial. Then I thought about Dad, lying in a hospital bed convinced he was losing his mind because Ryan had gaslit him so effectively. I thought about the unfinished letter where Dad questioned his own sanity rather than his son's honesty. I thought about a dying man's final weeks being poisoned by doubt and confusion because someone he trusted completely had betrayed that trust for money. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready to see this through." Thursday morning, Patricia and I walked into the Millbrook Police Department to file criminal charges against Ryan Thompson for elder financial abuse, fraud, and attempted theft. Detective Sarah Morgan, who specialized in financial crimes against elderly victims, reviewed our evidence with the focused attention of someone who'd seen too many families destroyed by greed and manipulation. "This is one of the most thoroughly documented elder abuse cases I've encountered," Detective Morgan said, after reviewing Dad's recordings, financial records, and personal notes. "Your father essentially built the prosecution's case for us." The detective explained that criminal charges would trigger an automatic investigation by the State Real Estate Licensing Board, likely resulting in suspension or revocation of Ryan's professional license. His business would effectively be destroyed whether he was ultimately convicted or not. "Are you certain you want to proceed?" Detective Morgan asked. "Once we file these charges, there's no going back. Your brother will face serious felony, counts that could result in significant prison time." I looked at the evidence spread across the detective's desk, hundreds of documents that told the story of a son who'd systematically abused his dying father's trust. Dad had spent his final weeks building this case not out of vindictiveness, but out of a desperate need for truth and justice. "File the charges," I said. Friday afternoon brought news that Ryan had been arrested at his real estate office, taken into custody on multiple felony charges related to elder financial abuse. The arrest was witnessed by clients and employees, ensuring that news of his crimes would spread throughout Millbrook's close-knit business community within hours. Amanda called that evening, her voice raw with tears and rage. "Are you satisfied? Now?" she screamed into the phone. "Ryan's been arrested in front of his clients. The children are asking why Daddy isn't coming home. Our whole life is destroyed because you couldn't let go of your jealousy about the will." "This isn't about jealousy," I said quietly. It's about justice for a dying man who was systematically robbed and manipulated by his own son. Ryan tried to help your father. Maybe he made some mistakes in judgment, but he never intended to hurt anyone. The word mistakes, in reference to 2 years of systematic fraud, was so inadequate it was almost funny. Ryan hadn't made mistakes. He'd committed crimes, repeatedly, deliberately, and with increasing boldness, as he'd realized Dad was too trusting and vulnerable to effectively resist. Amanda. Ryan stole over $40,000 using fake emergencies. He convinced Dad that his concerns about being manipulated were symptoms of mental illness. He tried to access Dad's accounts after his power of attorney was revoked. These aren't mistakes, they're felonies. You've destroyed our family over money that your father gave willingly to help his son. Dad gave that money because Ryan lied about needing it for repairs that never happened. That's fraud, not generosity. Amanda hung up without another word, but her call had served its purpose. It confirmed that even now, facing criminal charges and public disgrace, Ryan and his wife were still trying to frame systematic elder abuse as family financial misunderstandings. The trial began 6 months later in the Millbrook County Courthouse, drawing media attention from across Ohio due to the clear documentation of elder abuse and the systematic nature of Ryan's crimes. Dad's recordings, played in open court, revealed the voice of a confused and frightened old man trying to understand why his son was pressuring him to make financial decisions that didn't feel right. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, presented a case that was devastating in its clarity. Every fake emergency, every manufactured crisis, every lie Ryan had told to justify taking Dad's money was exposed and documented. The financial records showed exactly where the stolen money had gone. Luxury purchases for Ryan and Amanda while Dad lived modestly and worried about being a burden on his children. Ryan's defense attorney tried arguing that the money had been legitimate gifts from a father who wanted to help his successful son, but the evidence made that narrative impossible to maintain. Dad's calendar entries, his attempts to verify Ryan's claims about repairs, his efforts to reverse bank transfers. All of it demonstrated a man who'd realized he was being deceived and had tried to protect himself. The most powerful testimony came from Dr. Peterson, who confirmed under oath that Dad had been mentally competent throughout his illness and specifically concerned about financial manipulation. The physician's records showed that Dad had asked multiple times whether his medications could be affecting his judgment, hoping to understand why he felt so confused about family financial matters. Mr. Thompson was lucid, coherent, and entirely capable of making financial decisions, Dr. Peterson testified. His concerns about being manipulated weren't symptoms of illness. They were rational responses to what was actually happening to him. On the witness stand, Ryan maintained his innocence with the kind of self-righteous indignation that suggested he genuinely believed his own lies. He claimed Dad had been confused and paranoid, that the money had been freely given, that any documentation of his father's concerns was the product of medication-induced anxiety rather than legitimate suspicion. But the evidence was too overwhelming for jury manipulation. Dad had documented everything with the methodical precision of a contractor who understood that details mattered, and shortcuts led to disaster. The recordings, financial records, medical documentation, and contractor statements created an unassailable case of systematic elder abuse. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Ryan was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution plus damages, totaling nearly $60,000. His real estate license was permanently revoked, and he was required to register as someone convicted of crimes against elderly victims. But the real victory wasn't Ryan's conviction or the financial restitution. It was the public vindication of Dad's concerns and the confirmation that his final weeks of doubt and confusion had been justified responses to genuine abuse rather than symptoms of mental decline. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, I felt a profound sense of closure that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with honoring the man who'd raised me to believe that truth and justice mattered more than family, loyalty, or social peace. Dad had spent his final months building a case for justice, documenting Ryan's crimes with the same attention to detail he'd brought to every construction project. He'd trusted me with that evidence, believing I would have the strength to see justice done even when it meant holding family accountable for criminal behavior. I'd proven worthy of that trust, and in doing so, I'd discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. The quiet daughter who'd always tried to keep everyone happy was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that sometimes love means refusing to enable the people who've forgotten how to deserve it. The inheritance battle that had begun with Ryan's manipulation of Dad's will ended with complete vindication of Dad's true wishes and criminal conviction for the son who'd betrayed his trust. But more importantly, it ended with the knowledge that justice was possible even in the most painful family circumstances, and that standing up for what's right was worth any personal cost. Dad's final gift hadn't been money or property. It had been the opportunity to discover my own strength and the tools necessary to ensure that truth prevailed over manipulation. In honoring his memory through pursuit of justice, I'd found the person I was meant to become, someone worthy of the values he and Mom had tried to instill, someone capable of protecting the vulnerable even when the predators wore familiar faces. The house on Maple Street became my home, not through inheritance, but through justice. A place where I could build a life based on the principles Dad had died fighting to preserve. And every evening when I sat on the front porch where he'd spent his final healthy months, I knew he would be proud of the daughter who'd refused to let his story end with defeat and deception. Some battles are worth fighting regardless of the cost, and some truths are worth defending even when they destroy the illusions that make life comfortable. Dad had taught me both lessons through his careful documentation of my brother's crimes, ensuring that justice would be possible even after his voice was silenced forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.